They called her Lieutenant Papercuts, whispered jokes about the scars that crawled down her arms like shattered glass. A fresh recruit laughed loudest. Until the day a 4-star general walked in, locked eyes with her, and saluted first. The room froze, because the woman they mocked for her silence and grease-stained sleeves? She wasn't just maintenance. She was Phantom, a name buried so deep in Black Ops history, most believed it was a myth. What followed wasn't a promotion. It was a reckoning. This is the true story of what happens when arrogance meets legacy, and the quiet ones turn out to be legends. If that moved you, subscribe now. They deserve to be remembered. The morning hum at Ramstein felt almost alive, wings slicing the sky outside. Generators coughing awake, technicians barking part numbers across the bay. Inside Hangar 7, the air was thick with jet fuel, hydraulic oil, and the acrid sting of ozone clinging to recently discharged capacitors. It was the kind of scent that lingered in the nose long after you'd left the building, one that told you this place didn't just maintain machines, it rebuilt warbirds. Lieutenant Maya Reyes moved through it all like a shadow stitched into sunlight. Her boots struck the polished concrete with a rhythm as precise as the entries she made on her clipboard. Sleeves rolled past the elbow, regulations be damned, in the heat of the hangar exposed, the pale latticework of scar tissue spidering down both her forearms. Not faint or faded. Fresh enough that some looked newer than others. They told a story without saying a word. But no one ever asked. Private First Class Travis Jenkins stood near the diagnostic station, leaning back with the easy arrogance of a man too young to know how little he understood. 3 weeks into his first posting, and already he'd built a small audience, other new arrivals who mistook confidence for competence. Jenkins lowered his voice just enough to be plausible, deniable. "Check out Lieutenant Papercuts," he snickered, tilting his chin subtly toward Reyes. "Maintenance officer looks like she tried hugging a barbed wire fence." The laugh came easy from his friend's nervous, but complicit. Reyes didn't flinch, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the comment. She simply paused in her walk, checked a serial number on a shipment crate, and made a note. Then, slowly, she looked up. Her gaze found Jenkins with surgical precision. No anger, no embarrassment. Just a long, quiet look, flat, calm, utterly still. It lasted maybe 2 seconds, maybe less, but it hollowed something out inside him he couldn't name. She turned and walked on. Jenkins tried to smirk again, but it faltered halfway. His skin prickled, cold under the heat lamps. And somewhere behind him, a crew chief muttered without looking up, "Kid just stared into a storm he doesn't understand." The silence only made it worse. Each time Jenkins let a jab fly, laced with just enough plausible innocence to avoid direct reprimand, Lieutenant Reyes simply continued her work. No rebuttal, no raised voice, no flash of offense. Just that steady, unbothered posture and the ghost of an unreadable expression. To Jenkins, it looked like weakness. To everyone else, it was something they weren't ready to explain to a kid too green to hear it. By the end of the week, the nickname had spread through the new arrivals like spilled oil. Lieutenant Scarface, a cruel little brand passed between smirks in the mess hall, muttered during downtime near the lockers, etched in Sharpie on a toolbox when no one was watching. The old-timers didn't participate. They didn't laugh. They didn't say much at all. But their eyes followed the recruits longer. Their silences carried weight. Staff Sergeant Davis noticed. He didn't confront Jenkins directly until the third time he caught the private murmuring something just loud enough for Reyes to hear, something about how maybe she earned those scars arguing with a wrench. It wasn't funny, but Jenkins' circle chuckled anyway, more out of habit than amusement. After the lieutenant walked past, Davis approached. His uniform was wrinkled with purpose, the kind of worn in that told a different kind of story than a crisp set of blues. His eyes met Jenkins's with a stillness that quieted the air. "You don't know who you're talking to," he said evenly. Jenkins gave a scoff, playing to his audience. "She's just maintenance, Sergeant." Davis blinked once. "You keep thinking that, kid." It should have ended there. But the moment stuck in Jenkins's mind like grit in a gear. He didn't know why. Maybe it was the way the sergeant said talking to, not talking about. Maybe it was the way the laughter around him felt a little thinner this time. A little more hesitant. The next afternoon, Jenkins was called to assist on an urgent system diagnostic something about a failing control unit on an F-35's avionics interface. He'd barely started his scan when Reyes arrived, took one glance at the schematic, and pointed out the issue. Power bleed in the secondary bus, clear as day if you knew what to look for. Jenkins hadn't. She didn't gloat. Didn't correct him out loud. Just nodded to the tech chief and fixed it herself in less than 3 minutes. Jenkins stood back, jaw tight. He didn't say a word. But inside, a hairline fracture had started to form that ran straight through his carefully constructed arrogance. Lieutenant Reyes didn't walk, she moved. Deliberate steps, never rushed, never hesitant. She cut across the hangar with a presence so quiet it was easy to miss until you realized people were stepping out of her way without thinking. Jenkins started to notice it in moments he couldn't quite explain. Like how Master Sergeant Wilkins, who rarely deferred to anyone, would halt mid-sentence if Reyes so much as lifted a brow. Or how Captain Rollins, from Intel, stopped by twice in 1 week under the pretense of equipment coordination, and left each time with fewer words than he came in with. She didn't make noise, didn't command attention the way officers usually did. No clipped barks, no lectures or ego, just precision, calm, relentless precision. Inventory sheets with 0 errors. Systems diagnostics completed hours before the deadline. Problematic techs retrained, not reprimanded. She worked as if she'd done it 1,000 times before and was simply reacquainting herself with muscle memory. It was the authority that got to Jenkins, the unspoken kind. Reyes didn't throw her weight around. She didn't need to. People just listened. They leaned in when she spoke, nodded before she finished, adjusted without pushback. Jenkins had seen lieutenants get sidelined in hangars, like this young officers ignored or politely corrected by older NCOs who'd been on base longer than some generals, but not her. And it wasn't just her knowledge, though that was unsettling in its own way. Jenkins had overheard her walking a tech through a radar transceiver issue using terminology he hadn't even seen in his training modules. She talked about systems like someone who had designed them, not just maintained them. Once, she'd reconfigured a failing drone interface in under 5 minutes, using a manual override that wasn't in any SOP. He watched from across the bay that day, pretending to tighten a panel he'd already checked. The way her eyes moved, calculating, scanning, like she was 5 steps ahead of whatever the rest of them saw it, unnerved him. But pride was a stubborn shield. So he said nothing. He just watched her more closely now, waiting for a crack in the facade, some glimpse that she was just another officer with scars and silence. The crack never came. The morning briefing began like all the other stale coffee, stiff backs, and the soft murmur of boots shifting on tile as airmen and officers filtered into the command center. Colonel Harrington stood at the front, flanked by charts, screens, and the steady, flickering glow of status monitors. His voice carried the weight of fatigue and command. No dramatics. Just facts and deadlines. Today's agenda centered on a stealth drone retrofit problem that had been quietly escalating for weeks. The new thermal signature was too hot. Missions were getting scrubbed. Intel wasn't being delivered. Every engineering team had weighed in. No solution. The new configuration isn't sustainable, Harrington said, tapping a diagram. The intake placement on the X-47C causes a flare that can't be shielded. Rerouting heat signatures has failed. Unless we want to ground half the drone fleet, we need answers now. Silence followed. Not the heavy kind, just the kind where everyone waits for someone braver or higher ranked to speak first. From the back of the room, Reyes cleared her throat. "Sir, if I may." Heads turned. Some out of curiosity, others with a flicker of something closer to surprise. Jenkins sat 2 rows up, suddenly alert, more from instinct than understanding. Reyes stepped forward slightly but didn't rush. Her voice was calm, precise. The flare issue could be mitigated by reverting to the intake manifold configuration used in the prototype phase. Revision Delta 7. It was archived after the 4th test cycle, but, according to schematics in the archive logs, it would be compatible with the current chassis. Harrington blinked. Not dismissive. Processing. "You're talking about the prototype variant from the initial contract bid?" "Yes, sir. The flare profile in that version ran 9 degrees cooler and dispersed along the longitudinal axis. It would reduce the signature spike by 37%. Jenkins watched the colonel's face shift. Not irritated, not patronizing, just surprised. "Hadn't thought of that," Harrington muttered. Then louder. "Good catch, Lieutenant. Make it happen. Get Wilkins to pull the archive schematics." There was no applause, no backslaps, just quiet nods and quick glances. Jenkins fronced. Colonels didn't take technical guidance from lieutenants, not unless the lieutenant knew something no one else did. And that's when it started, not understanding exactly what Reyes was, but realizing she wasn't what she seemed. The sun was already sinking low behind the flight line when Jenkins caught sight of her heading out of Hangar 7. She moved with that same unhurried gait, clipboard under one arm, sleeves still rolled. The scars were in full view, angular, brutal things, like lightning carved into skin. They didn't fade in the golden light. If anything, they sharpened. He jogged a few steps to catch up, calling out, "Hey, Lieutenant." She paused, turned halfway. Her expression is neutral, not unfriendly, just unreadable. Jenkins offered a half smirk as he approached. "Just wanted to check in, make sure you're not wrestling any filing cabinets again. Looks like you've had some rough paperwork days." He reached out, not quite touching her, but gesturing vaguely toward the pale, jagged skin that ran along her forearm. She moved. Not a flinch, not a retreat. She stepped to the side in one clean motion fluid, practiced, almost surgical. It wasn't defensive. It was deliberate, a shift in space that left his hand hanging in the air, useless and awkward. Her eyes locked onto his. Calm, but no longer unreadable. For a split second, Jenkins felt something beneath the surface of that gaze. Something old, something coiled. Not violence, not anger. Something else. Measured. Dangerous in the way only experience can be. Then she blinked, the moment dissolving. "I appreciate your concern, Private," she said evenly, "but I think I can manage." She turned and walked away, leaving Jenkins standing in the gravel, hand still half raised, unsure whether he'd just embarrassed himself or narrowly avoided something much worse. The next morning, he found Davis in the tool cage, sorting diagnostic kits with the efficiency of a man who could do it blindfolded. Jenkins leaned against the frame, trying to sound casual. "Hey, staff, have you ever heard how Reyes got those scars?" Davis didn't look up. "Everyone hears things." Jenkins waited, arms crossed. "Well?" The sergeant finally met his eyes. There was no judgment, no amusement, just a weight behind the stare. "They weren't from paper cuts," he said quietly. Then he turned back to his task, leaving Jenkins in the kind of silence that didn't need filling. By midday, Ramstein felt like a hive shaken from sleep. Radios buzzed on encrypted channels. Officers moved faster, tighter, barking orders without looking up. Maintenance bays were scrubbed, flight decks double-checked, and briefings rewritten on the fly. Word spread fast, unconfirmed, but insistent. A 4-star was inbound. Jenkins caught the edge of the storm during his lunch break. He was still nursing a half-warm protein bar when a logistics runner told him to report to the command center. "Set up detail," she muttered, already moving on. He rolled his eyes. "Janitor duty," he grumbled to his friends, slinging his tablet into his pack. "Spent 6 months learning F-35 internals, and now I'm taping down chairs and polishing screens." They laughed, but it was thin, distracted. Even they could feel the shift in the air. Something big was coming, and the base was holding its breath. In the command center, Jenkins was handed a stack of briefing packets and told to align them at each seat in the main conference room. He set to work with all the enthusiasm of a man convinced his talents were being wasted. Reyes stood near the system's terminal, quietly confirming the sync between internal diagnostics and the projection feed. She didn't acknowledge him. He saw her, though. Saw the way she moved slower than usual, deliberate. She wasn't adjusting wires or directing personnel. Just standing there, watching. "Guess she wants to make sure the paper doesn't attack her again," Jenkins muttered to no one in particular, sliding folders into place. He said it just loud enough. Got a half-hearted chuckle from someone near the back. Reyes didn't turn, didn't flinch. The doors opened with a hydraulic sigh, and the room snapped to attention. "Attention on deck." General Maxwell Thornton stepped into the room with the quiet force of a man used to making decisions that cost lives. His ribbons were a wall of color across his chest, every step balanced and assured. Aides flanked him. A colonel followed, then another general trailing just behind. Everyone stiffened. Jenkins was a heartbeat slow, still trying to flatten his stack of briefing folders when he noticed something strange. Reyes hadn't moved. She was already at attention. Not rigid ready. Like she'd known the exact moment he'd enter the room. And her face abnormally blank. Professional was unreadable in a different way now. Like a shadow had passed behind her eyes. General Maxwell Thornton moved through the command center with the measured authority of a man used to rooms bending around him. He offered clipped nods to commanders, paused occasionally to ask a pointed question, every word delivered with military precision. He was 3 stations into his walkthrough, flanked by his staff, when he saw her. He stopped. Mid-stride. Mid-sentence. The room held its breath as Thornton's gaze locked on Reyes. His mouth opened slightly, eyes narrowing not in suspicion, but recognition old, deep recognition that ran beneath the skin. "My God," he murmured. "Fam, is that really you?" Silence fell like a hammer. Every officer turned. Every enlisted man froze. Aides blinked. Jenkins felt the room tilt, as if he'd missed a line in a play and now couldn't follow the plot. Even Colonel Harrington, usually unflappable, looked momentarily stunned. Reyes didn't smile, didn't move. She stood at attention, eyes steady, posture straight. "It's good to see you, sir," she said, voice low but clear. And then it happened. General Thornton, a man who'd overseen joint ops across 3 continents, who outranked every breathing soul in the building, brought his right hand up in a crisp, deliberate salute. To her, before she could return it. The breach, in protocol, was breathtaking. Salutes moved up the chain, not down, not unless the person on the receiving end had done something that obliterated the usual rules. Murmurs broke the silence, soft, disbelieving. A colonel near the front leaned toward his aide, whispering a single word. "Phantom." Jenkins felt the blood drain from his face. That name, Phantom, wasn't on any org chart. It wasn't pinned to any chest. It was passed around in hushed tones at the academy, in after-hours barrack stories, buried under layers of conjecture and disbelief. An operator who didn't officially exist. A ghost who'd planned and executed Operation Black Stone, one of the most classified hostage rescues in modern military history. The mission with 0 casualties and no official footprint. The one they all said had to be a myth. Jenkins's mouth was dry. He looked at Reyes. No. Phantom Man saw none of the woman he had mocked for her scars and silence. Only the gravity of someone who had done the impossible and chosen never to speak of it. He felt sick and small, and suddenly very, very aware of just how wrong he'd been. The door to Colonel Harrington's office closed with a soft click, but the silence it left behind was thunderous. No one spoke, not right away. Officers shifted in place, uncertain whether to return to business or brace for some other revelation. The enlisted stared at the door like it might open again and spill out secrets. Inside, General Thornton and Reyes spoke in low, controlled voices, just beyond the thin wall. No one could hear the words, but the weight of them was palpable. Jenkins sat frozen near the back of the room, folders still clutched in his hands like a shield he didn't know he needed. Phantom. He kept turning the name over in his mind, trying to force it to make sense. Trying to reconcile the cold legend with the quiet woman he'd mocked for weeks. He'd called her Lieutenant Scarface. He'd joked about paperwork accidents. He'd laughed at someone who had done things he would never be allowed to even read about. Across the room, a captain was whispering to another officer, the words fragmented but urgent. Blackstone. Kandahar. Intel extraction. 12-hour window. 3 hostages. All alive. Each sentence landed like a punch to the ribs. And Jenkins had thought she was just maintenance. The door opened. General Thornton stepped out first, face unreadable but composed. Harrington followed, eyes lowered, more subdued than Jenkins had ever seen him. Reyes came last, still in her flightline fatigues, still with grease on her sleeves and those same scars, now rolled down and hidden beneath fabric. Thornton stepped forward and addressed the room with calm finality. Colonel Reyes will remain in her current post, at her request. Her past assignments and operational history are now a matter of classified record. As far as anyone outside this room is concerned, she is Lieutenant Reyes, Maintenance Division. Is that understood? The chorus of "Yes, sir" was immediate, unified. Thornton nodded once. Good. Then he turned, walked past officers, aides, and airmen without breaking stride. When he reached Jenkins, he paused. Carry on, Private, he said, not unkindly. Jenkins opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Just a dry breath and a nod that felt hollow in his chest. He didn't watch them leave. Couldn't. The floor had never looked so steady, or so far beneath him. The noise of Ramstein returned, eventually. Aircraft still howled across the sky, hangar doors still rumbled open and shut, and clipboards still changed hands with the same dry rustle of routine. But beneath it all, something had shifted. People stood straighter when Reyes walked by now. Conversations paused, not out of fear, but respect. Senior NCOs who once barely nodded now offered her quiet greetings. Officers deferred without being asked. She never acknowledged the change, never acted differently. But the difference was undeniable. A subtle recalibration of gravity, like the room had learned to orbit a new center without ever being told. Reyes remained the same. She taught junior techs with the same even tone. She corrected mistakes without fanfare. She knelt beside aircraft systems with sleeves rolled just enough for her scars to whisper across her skin, but no one joked about them anymore. No one dared. Jenkins watched all of it through new eyes. He'd stopped arriving just on time. Now he was there early, clipboard in hand, gloves on before the coffee had even brewed. He asked questions when he didn't know something. He listened when Wilkins explained a system schematic, and when Reyes gave instructions, he followed them without commentary, without attitude, just quiet focus. The bravado was gone. In its place, something still forming, something shaped by shame and the slow grind of earned humility. One evening, the maintenance bay emptied out later than usual. Jenkins lingered, checking a fault report on an auxiliary relay. Reyes was at her station across the room. Logging system updates. He cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, almost too soft to be heard. "Lieutenant Colonel, whatever you prefer. I owe you an apology. For what I said, for how I acted, I didn't know." She looked up, the light catching the faint webwork on her arms. Her face was unreadable for a beat. "You weren't meant to," she replied, voice steady. "I still shouldn't have said it," he said. "I was disrespectful, immature." "Yes," she said without cruelty. "Just a fact." He nodded, not expecting grace, but hoping. She rolled down her sleeves. "Scars tell stories, Private," she said quietly. "Not all of them are yours to know." Then she returned to her work. And Jenkins stood there, hands at his sides, the words etched into his memory like a lesson earned in silence. Weeks passed, and the rhythms of Rammstein settled again. The buzz of the hangar returned to its normal pitch, work orders came in steady, and aircraft came and went under a sky that didn't care who had done what in the shadows. But beneath the surface, there was a quiet shift, an unspoken reverence, that trailed behind one particular officer in fatigues and rolled sleeves. Reyes never changed. She arrived early, logged parts with the same quiet precision, walked the hangar floor with her clipboard balanced neatly against one forearm. The scars were always there, sometimes visible, sometimes not. She never spoke of them. She never had to. Jenkins watched with a different set of eyes now. He noticed the way Reyes corrected without belittling, the way she could take a green text scrambled report and turn it into something useful in minutes. She never raised her voice, never made a show. And yet, no one questioned her. Not anymore. He modeled himself after that. Showed up early, stayed late, learned the systems properly. When he spoke, it was with purpose. When he didn't know something, he asked. The cocky grin had faded, replaced by something quieter, more focused. It wasn't that he feared her anymore, was that he understood the cost of misunderstanding her. One morning, a new batch of recruits arrived fresh from tech school. Still wide-eyed. Still full of noise. One of them, lean and loud, nudged his buddy as Reyes walked past. "Damn," the kid said with a laugh. "Looks like somebody lost a fight with a shredder." Jenkins didn't hesitate. "Be careful," he said, voice calm. "You don't know who she is." The recruit snorted. "She's just maintenance." Jenkins looked at him, really looked, and then gave the faintest of smiles. Not smug, not angry. "That's what I thought once." He turned back to his work, cinching the panel closed on an engine bay, his posture sure, movements efficient. He didn't need to explain. Some lessons don't come from manuals. They come from silence, from scars, from watching someone carry a legacy without ever asking for recognition. Some legends don't wear medals. They wear sleeves rolled high and leave the rest unsaid.